Hello everyone. I'm Dr. Kanak Kalita. I'm associated with the mechanical department at Valtech Technical University, Chennai, as an assistant professor. Uh, in this lecture or in today's session, we are going to discuss about what is the importance of the publications, what is the importance of the graphs and plots in publication, and how should we make very unique and publication quality graphs by using a popular uh, graphing platform known as the Origin Pro. It's a licensed version and it's a commercial software. So you may need to purchase a license for the Origin Pro. Okay. So let me show you how you can get Origin Pro for a very minimal amount. Just go to the Google and type Origin Pro. You should come across this particular website. It's the www.originlab.com. Let us go to purchase. So previously, Origin was uh, Origin was licensing them, or Origin was giving this kind of license for academicians free of cost, at least for 6 months. Now I think they have stopped that particular process. Still, you can get a. I think you can get. Okay, let us go to student, and I think you can get a free trial now also. And I think this trial is only for 21 days. Yeah, you can fill this up and you will get the a license of the full version of the latest full version of the Origin. You can get it for 21 days. And even if you want to purchase it, a student version, which is pretty well for, which is pretty good for the kind of graphs that we will be drawing and the kind of graphs that we need in scientific publications. It is relatively cheap at around $69. So this should not be more than 7,000 Indian rupees. So that's quite a cheap platform if you go for the student version. Okay. So now let us discuss a little about how we can improve the uh, quality of the graphs that we put in our publications or in our papers. You see, the graphs and the plots, they form a very important part of our publication, because the better the presentation is, the more the readers will be attracted to it. The graph should be such that it should very nicely and very easily communicate the idea that we have in mind to our readers. So let us move to the next slide. So this is the most common and the easiest form of graphs to depict some information. These are the bar graphs. We all have been studying bar graphs since our childhood days. So the bar graphs, simply by means of some towers, they communicate the message. They try to communicate the message. For example, here I have conducted 18 different experiments, and for this 18 different experiments, they were measured with different methods or different techniques. So this bar graphs here only shows uh, the variation of each of the techniques for each of the experiments, and this is a performance measure. So bar graph generally works in the sense that higher the value and the higher will be the tower. Similarly, here is another bar graph. Here, what distinct feature you see is that instead of the numbers here, we have here some name of some materials, and for each of the materials some information is being communicated for, again, for four different methods. So now we'll see how to make this kind of bar graphs. So I've already copy pasted some basic information here, the values, the tabular values here. Suppose, say, we'll try and draw this particular information, or this particular information is already there in this particular graph or in this particular worksheet. So let us try to draw this particular graph. So the first thing that you notice here in this graph is that it has an x-axis, where the x-axis are the alternatives from 1 to 18, and it has an y-axis, and the y-axis is common for all these four methods. Value of the y-axis can be from 1 to 0, 0 to 1, and it is common for all these four methods. So the same information that we have here. So what we can do is that simply what we should do is that we should first look into this, that whether this particular axis, the particular axis that we want in X, it is depicted as X or not. If it is depicted as X, it's okay. And similarly, all the Y axis should be depicted here as BY, CY, and so on. Okay. Next, what we'll do is that we'll try to draw this particular graph. For this, suppose say I will try for only one method first, and then we'll show how you can draw for all the other methods. So we'll just select both these axes and we'll go to the graphs here, and we can click on the column. Okay. So this is the basic form of the bar graph. So this is the basic form of the bar graph, and this is how it will look like for one method. Similarly, if we draw for two different methods, we can draw it from here. Again, we can click on here. We can go to column, and this is how it will look like. Let us try to draw for all the four data sets that we have, and this is something it will look like. Again, we can adjust this depending on your own preference. You can adjust this. So if you double click on this, the ease of the most important advantage of Origin Pro is that it is very easy to use. Most of us have been using MS Excel for drawing our graphs, and the distinct feature that you will notice here as compared to the MS Excel is that the graphs here are of very nice quality. You can adjust the uh, quality, you can adjust the format in which you want to save the graphs, you can adjust the DPI, okay? And you can also manipulate the graphs, or you can also draw and redraw the graphs very easily. Let us see here how we can change this. Just if you want to change this particular axis, I suppose say I want that there should not be this small minor grid that is here. I do not want this minor grid. I just want my main grid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. The alternative numbers should be here, and I do not want any subgrid here. So just let me double click here. So once you double click here, what you'll find, you'll come across this particular tab, and this particular tab contains a lot of information. It contains 7 different sub tabs. So let me go to this particular tab. In this particular tab, it is the horizontal bar. The horizontal bar is this one. So it is ranging from 0.5 to 18.5. So it starts from 0.5 to 18.5. Okay, and we need 18 different. We have 18 different columns. Okay, so just let me. Here the increment is set as 1. Increment means from 1, 2, 3, and so on. So here the increment is 1. Here the increment is 1. That increment is being set by here. And the minor ticks, these are the minor ticks, these are set as 1 between each two major ticks. So what we can do is that we can just make this 0, and we can, and now you see that only the prominent major ticks, that is the alternatives, are displayed here. Similarly, we can adjust a little the y-axis also. This is the horizontal one, this is the vertical one. Let me click here. You see that the increment is here 0.2, so 0, 0.2, and so on. When you draw a particular graph, the Origin automatically adjusts it to look the best way. And if you want, you can then again go back to the settings and go back to these settings, and you can adjust them according to your own preference. Suppose say I want that it should be exactly up. Now this is what my graphs look like. Now I want that the entire box or this entire graph should be enclosed in a box kind of thing. For example, the graph that is shown here, that is enclosed in a box here. Okay, I want it to look like that way. So let me double click on this. This menu should again pop up. We'll go to the grid lines. And the grid lines are basically the lines that are drawn from the major and the minor ticks in the particular x and y direction. For example, here you see, here in the diagram you can see this is for the horizontal. These are the major ticks. From the major ticks, some lines are there. Let me show you by an example. If I click this on, and if I switch it on, So you can see some lines appearing here. Okay, so this kind of major grids and the minor grids help us to identify certain data when there are number of data is there, when a number of data is there, and just by looking at the graph we want to find out the value. Then these minor grids and major grids are helpful for us. For example, let us click on this also, the minor grid also. So you see that these subgrids has also appeared. You can change the color as per your choosing here. Okay, you can adjust the color of these grids individually for the minor grids and the major grids, and you can also change the line type. There are different line types here, so based on your preference you can change the line type. So I do not want the major grids and minor grids for this particular drawing, so let me switch them off. Apply. Similarly for the vertical direction also this can be done. Okay, now let us again come back to the horizontal direction, and I say that I want a box kind of thing for this entire plot. So what we can do is that we can go to the horizontal, and since x here what it is saying, additional lines at x equal to 0. This is not needed in this particular line because at x equal to 0 we already have a line. At x equal to 0 we already have a lines. So let me click on the opposite and let me click apply. So in the horizontal, as soon as I click on the opposite and press enter, so you see that this in the opposite direction a line is created here. Similarly in the vertical, if you go and you click it here, another box, the total box is formed and it will look like this. And this you can adjust, you can move this as per your wish, and you can change it wherever it is. These levels you can move from any place that you want to, and even you can just by dragging and the edge of the box you can adjust the size of the levels also, or the legend also you can adjust. Okay, so this is the basic type of graph. If you want to change the type of the color scheme that is here, you need to again double click on the graphs here. So see, there are two distinct features in this particular graph. First thing, when you want to change the axis and when you want to change the layout, you need to click on the outer portions. And when you want to change something inside, when you want to change the color scheme or anything that is inside the graph, you need to click anywhere inside, you need to double click. Once you double click, it will show you that there are these are the four different uh, columns that we used in this graph to draw this particular graph. So these are the particular four different columns. And here, if you go, let us start from the starting. If you go to here, so here it is showing you the pattern. So there are a number of different uh, formats available. For example, if I want, this is now in solid, if I want some transparency to it, let us see if what happens if we set the transparency to 50%. Let me apply. A faded kind of thing has happened. So depending on what kind of graph you want, you can adjust the transparency here. Again, you can also control the spacing between each of these particular columns and between each cluster of columns. You can adjust this. How you can adjust? So the gap between bars, you can control this. Suppose say I make it 50%. To see that the distances between the clusters, or the space between these clusters between 4 and 5 and 5 and 6, this is increased by increasing the gap percentage. Similarly, if I want that there should be some gap between each of the individual subparts of each of the clusters, I want some gap between the WSM, WPM, bus and topsis. So what I can do, I can set some overlap percent, and here the overlap percent I need to specify it in negative because I want that it should not overlap. Overlap means one above the another. So I want it not to overlap. So let me set the overlap as minus 30%. Okay. If I did positive, it will look like this. One is touching above the other. And if I set the overlap as suppose say negative, then some gaps will appear. You see that some gaps have appeared now. Let us minimize this. Let us make this gap only 10. Then it will be more visible. Yeah, now you see it is now more visible. Now there is some particular gap between each of the each of the subparts of each of the alternatives. Okay, so like this you can control the gaps between, or you can control your plot. Let us go to group. This is another important feature of the origin graphs is the group. Now you see in this particular drawing that all these four diagrams are dependent. Dependent means if I change anything related to it, everything else will change. Here, what you see here is that the fill color is changing by an increment 1. So, and this is the color combination that we are using, black, red, blue, and magenta. So what we can do is, if we want, let us start from here. Let me make this green. Let me make this blue. It's okay. Let me make this magenta. Let me click OK. So now, like this, we can change the colors of the particular diagram. And again, we can go back to the level. And if suppose say we want the values also on each of these graphs, we can just enable this and we can click OK, and then the values of each of the graphs will also be displayed here. For this diagram it will look too clumsy, let us switch it off. And this is how we draw a bar graph. Okay, this is the basic form of graph that we will use. This is how we draw a bar graph. Now let us go back to our PPT and see the next type of graph. The next type of graph that we constantly use is bar graph with error measures. What are error measures basically? Suppose say for you have conducted an experiment and you have conducted 3 different trials of an experiment. You have taken 3 different measurements of the same experiment. For each of the experiment, there are 16 experiments, and for each of the experiment, you have taken 3 different trials. So it is a common norm in scientific publications is that we generally specify the average of the 3, or suppose say the 5 readings that you have taken. We specify the only the average value. Along with the average value, it is also a good tendency, or it is also a good practice to specify the standard deviation of these independent readings. So what basically standard deviation tells us, the standard deviation basically tells us that from the average value on a plus minus how much the other values are deviating. Suppose say if I say the average, if I say that a car is running at an average speed of 300 uh, 300 meter or 300 kilometer per hour. So, and if I specify, then it means that over an entire hour, it has been traveling with 300 meter per second, 300 kilometer per hour, 300 kilometer per hour. And if I specify the standard deviation also with it, if I say that it has a standard deviation of 10 kilometer per hour, so it means the speed, the maximum and the minimum speed can be 290 and 310. Okay, so it also gives us a idea of how much deviation in the readings can be there. For example, in this particular reading number 16, you see that a deviation can be ranged from here to here. Okay, so now let us see how we can draw this in the origin. Let us go back to this graph. I have already set up the uh, data here. Suppose we have the experiment number here. We have 3 different readings, reading 1, reading 2, reading 3. This is the average reading, and this is the standard deviation. This I've already calculated in Excel, and I've just copy pasted here. Even it can be calculated here also. So I just copy pasted it here, the data. So the first thing that we need to do is that this is the X bar, or this is the X column, and this is the Y column. And here we need to set this as a error. We need to set this as a Y error, because we are also specifying the amount of error that is there in the Y. So now let us try to hold the control button on your keyboard and select these 3 particular columns. Now let us go to the column, and so by default, since we have also specified the Y error here, so whenever you try to draw a normal bar bar graph, it will also specify the standard deviation or the errors with it. Okay, the accompanied error or the accompanied standard deviation in each of the readings, it will also specify it. Now you can again follow the same procedure that you followed for the last time. You can set this as per your wish. You can make a box of it, or you can keep it as it is as you want. So this is the basic way how you can draw a bar graph.